Welcome to the Maguire Podcast. My name is Brian Cooper. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Maguire and your host for this podcast. At Maguire, we've been helping to store and protect quality water for over 100 years. On this episode, our guest is South Dakota Congressman Dusty Johnson. Congressman Johnson brings an energetic and optimistic style to Washington as South Dakota's lone voice in the U.S. House of Representatives. A recognized leader in issues related to rural America, agriculture, and welfare reform, he serves on the Agricultural Committee and as chairman of the Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development Subcommittee. As a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Dusty has been focused on finding solutions to the supply chain crisis through his Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which passed the House in 2021. Appointed to the Select Committee on China, Dusty addresses the 360-degree threat posed by China, especially their ownership of American ag land and ag businesses and control over tech. Prior to being elected to Congress, he served as Chief of Staff to the Governor of South Dakota and Vice President of an engineering firm specializing in rural telecommunications. Dusty lives in Mitchell, South Dakota with his wife and 3 sons. Congressman Johnson, welcome to the Maguire Podcast.
It's a big deal. Thanks for having me.
Right, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about transportation and infrastructure. You were named to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in January. Can you tell people kind of what the goal of that committee is and kind of your role in that?
Yeah, and it was a couple years ago now, January.
Okay.
So this is my 3rd year on the committee, and infrastructure is one of the main themes really throughout my time, whether it was in the public sector or the private sector. Before being in Congress, I was the co-owner of an engineering and consulting firm that did a lot of outside plant work related to rural broadband business in about 40 states. Prior to that, I was on the Public Utilities Commission, worrying about telecom and energy infrastructure. Prior to that, I was with USDA Rural Development. I just really, really think infrastructure is an incredibly important area to invest in. And I get a lot of that being on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. It's going to be a long-term home for me. Sometimes in D.C., people get on those important worker bee committees only as a jumping-off point for them to get in something, more sexy or luxurious committee, somewhere where maybe they think they can raise more money. For me, I'm on agriculture and transportation infrastructure. Those are the kind of blocking and tackling policy committees that I'm going to be on long term, and have been able to get a lot of legislation passed out of that T&I committee.
What are some of the major topics that are coming out of that committee right now, or things that your committee is looking forward to?
The issue we've worked on most really this year has been FAA reauthorization. People know about the 5-year highway bill, and they talk about that a lot. We also do a 5-year aviation bill. And FAA, of course, Federal Aviation Administration. That makes it sound like it's just tinkering around with the agency, which doesn't sound as exciting as the highway bill. That's why I generally call it the 5-year aviation bill, because it's much bigger than just the FAA. It really is about what airports are we going to have, what kind of capital expenditure budgets will the federal government help them with? How are we going to manage that airspace? How are we going to manage transportation safety? How are we going to make sure that we continue to be on the cutting edge of having an aviation system we can be proud of? In the 2 years prior to that, a lot dealing with the supply chain. And I think it's safe to say I was probably one of the top 3 or 4 most productive members working on that supply chain arena. Had a bill signed into law by the president at the White House that really transformed how the foreign flagged ocean carriers have to treat American goods going to Asia, or how we treat Asian goods that are coming back to this country. And I don't care who you are. I don't care what line of work you're in. I don't care what kind of consumer you're in. That trade back and forth between Asia and the United States has a big impact on your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. At Maguire, we help store and protect quality water, working on water towers and water tanks all across the country. Where does that fit into the infrastructure part of your committee?
It's really, really important. I think when you start, number one, if you want to talk about something that is important but not sexy, water is a great place to start. So I feel a great kinship when we're talking about water infrastructure, because I like to think that I'm important, and I know that I am not sexy. And so this is, this is like home for me. Even as chief of staff to Governor Dennis Dugard, one of the things that I was interested in with these omnibus water bills that would come to the legislature, I mean, huge amounts of money that South Dakota would invest would not grab the headlines. When you start talking about safe drinking water, when you're talking about making sure we've got efficient and effective wastewater, some of the rural water projects, this is stuff that gets me excited. And so does that fit, as your question, very much into the important work of the committee? Yeah, absolutely. It's a big part of our work.
How important is that for you to be on a committee as someone who understands that, has gotten in the weeds, has had the experience in those sectors? Because, like you said, it's not a sexy thing that gets a lot of attention, but it's really needed infrastructure.
I think particularly around the area like siting reform, it's really actually hard to build things in this country, big things anymore. The same type of transportation project that you can get done in 2 years in France or Italy, it takes 7 years to get done in America. And unfortunately, we have the same types of problems with energy projects or water projects, or basically any time you're going to turn a shovel full of dirt. That irritates everybody. I don't care whether you're on the left end of the spectrum or the right end of the spectrum. People know that that's wrong, that we should not be getting our butts kicked by France and Italy like that. But the solutions are kind of hard to pin down. They don't fit on a bumper sticker slogan. So you've got to have people on the committee who are willing to roll up their sleeves, dive in, and really understand, okay, what do we need to do to the EIS process or the environmental assessment process? What do we need to do with, the court environment to really make sure that we're protecting people's rights while not dragging these things out over a decade?
Talk a little bit about, our aging infrastructure in America, whether that's highways, water, all of that. But the federal government in recent years has started acknowledging and starting to fund these projects at higher levels than they have, since, after World War II. What does that look like in your committee and in Congress? Why the focus? Why that, hey, these are things that we have to take care of?
Yeah, high quality infrastructure is a big part of American competitiveness, and we want to make sure that we keep that quality infrastructure high. I do think that there has been a narrative out there, for the last 10 years about, quote, America's crumbling infrastructure, which has been totally overblown and not at all consistent with the facts. And it's a narrative really pushed by the American Society for Civil Engineers. They give us an annual report card on infrastructure. They only grade one country, so I don't know exactly what they compare us to. And the answer is they literally compare us to perfect infrastructure. Like A would be perfect. And so every year they give us a C, and that generates a series of headlines about how far behind America is falling. And it's utter balderdash. When you compare us to other countries, which again seems like that would be the comparison group, we have the 13th best infrastructure in the world, and everybody who beats us is like a nation state. So who's number one? It's Singapore. Singapore is the same size as New York City. Who would have thought that it would have been easier to get broadband deployed in Singapore than it would to Redfield, South Dakota, right? Or Hettinger, North Dakota. They're dealing with to get highways or to get rural water systems there. I mean, we are a massive country. Nobody spends decade in and decade out on infrastructure like America does. And again, it is one of the secret sauces of American exceptionalism. So I'm not in any way downplaying it. I do think that we want to take some time, as your question prompted, to celebrate what has been a pretty impressive, long-standing commitment to infrastructure. I'm growing concerned, though, that we are wasting a lot of the new money we've thrown at these projects. A lot of the money is well spent, don't get me wrong. But when we are taking 7 projects to do a project that should be done in 2 years, that's wasted American taxpayer dollars. When we are forcing projects, as we are in the transportation space, not to increase capacity, but instead we're making investments, as Secretary Pete Buttigieg just said in our committee, to make sure that we're undoing some wrongs that have been done to communities that were maybe treated unfairly by past infrastructure investments. Well, obviously, we want to treat everybody fairly, right? That's an American value that we need to own up to. The fact that we have an administration that kind of refuses to add any more lane miles that increase capacity because they don't want more cars on the road, I think is maybe a little more aggressive than most Americans probably are comfortable having their infrastructure dollars being spent on.
You come from and represent a state like South Dakota. We work in 34 different states across the country, but honing in on South Dakota, rural is always the hardest, just because
very expensive.
very expensive the way it looks. What does that look like when you bring messages like that to the committee, and how does that influence decisions? Because a lot of times I think it can, you look at the bigger places and not look at, what a lot of people call flyover country.
Right. And yeah, it's taken a long time to get a project like Lewis and Clark done. Year in and year out when I've been there, we've tried to make sure to argue that there are the appropriate dollars given to the Bureau of Reclamation so they can flow down to Lewis and Clark and the other authorized water projects. And it has not been easy. We're getting toward the end of the finish line, and I think that's really worth celebrating. We also see it in things like rural airports. I mean, this year on the committee, there was a plan to, in essence, increase the fees that rural airports have to pay. It would have cost 3 rural South Dakota airports about $4 million over the next few years. And I'm glad there's an airport in Pierre and in Aberdeen and in Watertown. I wouldn't want them to close. I think they are tremendous assets. We've closed a number of passenger airports in this state over the course of the last 20 years, from Huron to Mitchell to Yankton to Brookings. It was harder to make an argument for a passenger airport in Brookings, when we had one so close in Sioux Falls. When you start talking about Pierre, the state capital, the largest town in any direction for 2.5 hours, we want to make sure that airport is able to serve the state. And I was able to convince my colleagues on the committee to drop their stupid idea because I was able to talk, just like you described, the importance of investing in rural.
That's one of the other things. And so talking about investing in rural, investing in infrastructure, there's also a trickle-down effect to a company like Maguire, where we do water projects across, like I said, 34 states, but because of the infrastructure investment, it's allowed us to grow and do new things like our campus so that we can help, people across the country store and protect quality water.
Yeah, really important. And I do think the substantially increased investment into water projects over the last few years has been good news. There's been a lot of federal money wasted, but when we're investing in things like water infrastructure, the ROI on those things, the quality of life improvement with those projects is it's easy to be proud of them.
And it's one of those things, too. It's allowed states like South Dakota, who have a robust rural water system, to expand those systems as our state continues to grow.
Yeah, and what we know is that there are 2 pretty massive rural water projects that South Dakota wants to embark on. One that would serve Aberdeen and the rest of northeast South Dakota, would give Webb Water some additional capacity as well. And then out in the hills, they are really excited about the idea of a Missouri River pipeline bringing some quality water out to the hills. Those projects are not going to happen without some pretty substantial investments. It'll be a partnership, as all big water projects are, and we want to keep moving that ball down the field as well.
Talk a little bit about, you've gone through those discussions because of Lewis and Clark and other things. Does that help pave the way of what this kind of looks like moving forward? Because, we have experience in these kind of projects.
Yes. One big change is in the early days of Lewis and Clark, we still had earmarks where members of Congress could go ask for money for a particular project. They could build bridges to nowhere if they wanted to. And that old system was abused to the extent where it was gotten rid of. The Republicans took control of the House. That was maybe the time they did it 12 years ago. They got rid of our earmarks entirely. And so that's why the process that I just described was put into place. I couldn't go get money for Lewis and Clark. I needed to go get money for the Bureau of Reclamation. And then they were able to look at, I think there were 5 authorized water projects, and make sure that they were getting those authorized projects funded appropriately. Earmarks are back a little bit. They're not something that I engage in. It's probably about a third of the House doesn't engage in earmarks because they're concerned about the process. 2/3 of the House does. But I think I see the momentum moving away from earmarks. I think that may get closer to 50-50. And I think there are good arguments on both sides. We've always found that we are able to go tell a story about the importance to invest in rural infrastructure and secure dollars for rural infrastructure and get them going where we want them to go, even without asking for a particular project by name.
A little more macro question. Water is becoming more and more of a scarce resource. It's getting talked about more.
Yeah, particularly in the Southwest.
And that's my question huge. Is in the Southwest, California, places where populations are exploding and there's not a great water source, and people start talking about, how do we take water from the Missouri River and pipe it where we need to go or what are alternative sources. What does the infrastructure committee look at when they start talking about these issues?
That is not the kind of thing we've engaged in any kind of a macro level. Those questions about, water rights and water availability are really done by agencies. And there's a lot of state and regional leadership on that level too. It's not like all of the decisions get made in DC. There is clearly over the long haul going to be an impact on the price of water. And that particularly true in the Southwest. That's going to be the market sending a signal to people that maybe they want to make different kinds of decisions. I like my Kentucky bluegrass lawn in Mitchell, South Dakota. Don't get me wrong. I put a lot of water on that thing. I think in the Southwest, you increasingly see people not having lawns like that because the market is telling them that's a pretty expensive way to use water. So it's going to be a combination of new investments on the front end and I think changing consumer behavior on the back end that is going to make sure that we properly steward that scarce resource.
How do you, as a congressman from South Dakota, continue to encourage this type of growth in that transportation and infrastructure committee?
Honestly, I don't have to be much of a Johnny Appleseed. I mean, I think most people who work hard to get on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee understand the value of infrastructure.
Are there for a reason, like you explained earlier?
They're there for a reason. I suppose it's a little bit bigger fight when we get onto the floor of 435 members. And again, nobody's anti-infrastructure. But I think we can have, I think reasonable people can disagree about how to pay for it. So with the, infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure plan that you and I have talked about provided a lot of additional resources to water projects. That spending was good. It was virtuous. I think we made a real mistake in how we financed the infrastructure projects in that bill. I think we set ourselves up for a terrible fiscal cliff. We basically paid for all of the next generation infrastructure for the next few years by sweeping up unspent COVID dollars. It seems like a good idea until all of that money runs out in a few years. And then what's going to fund the maintenance of the highways? What's going to fund the maintenance of those water projects? Normally, when we have a new big round of infrastructure spending, we pay for it. The most common way we do that on the roads is to increase the gas tax. The gas tax isn't a percentage, so it doesn't grow as the price of gas grows. That means periodically you need to restore the purchasing power of the gas tax. Congress took the easy way out this last time. We didn't touch that. We used one-time dollars to pay for perpetual investments. That means in 5 years, we are going to have to, in essence, pay for 2 generations of gas tax increases. Congress probably won't do that. They'll be too cowardly. If they weren't able to do it last year, they're not going to be able to do it 5 years from now. And we're going to create a fiscal cliff. And that's really going to hurt the long-term investment in infrastructure. It was a terrible decision to not pay for this stuff.
So my question in that then is, okay, we've taken this route, your committee, Congress in general, how do they look at the future of infrastructure spending? Because, okay, we've allocated all this money right now. What does 3 years look like from now? Is that going to dry up because we're going to have, as you've put it, a financial cliff that we have to go, okay, now what?
Yeah, and I've had this conversation. I've had this debate with Secretary Buttigieg, and I think if he was on your podcast, we should work on that. It'd be a fun back and forth.
Absolutely.
He said, hey, I don't believe in the user pays system. Well, you're describing it again. This is less about water and more about highways, right?
Right.
He says, I don't believe in the user pays system. Now, I would say, Dusty Johnson would say, the user pays system is a central hallmark of why our infrastructure is so good. Rather than having infrastructure dollar for roads fighting over the same pot of dollars with veterans who need new knees, with an Air Force that needs new bombers, with Americans with disabilities who want additional support services, we have a dedicated funding stream. The gas tax comes off and it only goes to that thing. And it keeps us from having these massive fights about what do you care about more, decent roads or disabled Americans. Secretary Pete doesn't like that. He wants to destroy the user pays system. He's been honest about that. And I would say that the last infrastructure bill was a massive strike against the user pays system. I think it'll be almost impossible to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Well, and in water infrastructure, for rural water systems, communities that have gotten this funding to improve their infrastructure, how are they going to take care of the maintenance, in the future? Because they've gotten this money to increase it, renovate it, build new, but, that has maintenance costs down the road as well. So what does that look like? Because it has to go back to, well, we're going to increase your water rates to pay for the maintenance of these assets.
Yeah, and you'll know better than I do how various different systems work. But it seems to me that, yes, user rates, user fees do pay for maintenance. They are generally not used probably as much as they should be on capital expenditures. We have a tendency to look to large state or federal investments to make those happen. And particularly at state governments, there are some dedicated funding sources. Again, you'll probably know more than I do, but in South Dakota, I think we use various different petroleum taxes and like old cleanup fees to be able to sweep into a large pot to help fund the omnibus water bill. And there are some different funding streams that might help with WRDA at the federal level. But in general, you're also fighting over the big pot of tax dollars. And so when we move all of the highway infrastructure and put the demand on that same pot of dollars, it's going to make it harder for water projects to win. And so killing the user pays system for highways is also going to hurt water. Just that much more competition for the same dollar.
Right. What else do you have coming up in Congress as it pertains to infrastructure? Anything else that you want to talk about?
As you started at the top of the podcast by talking about, I mean, we have seen a pretty high level of investment in infrastructure, frankly, at both the state and the federal level, at both Republican and Democratic administrations. This continues to be one of the very, very few bipartisan areas of agreement in America. So I think we're really well positioned. We're going to get the Farm Bill done here in the next year. I'm a committee chairman, and I'm the chairman of the committee that oversees rural broadband. And so that'll be another area, sort of the next frontier of how do we make some pretty substantial investments to make sure that we're connecting America. We don't want two Americas, one light, one dark, one dry, one with water, one that's connected, one that's not. And that commitment, I think, to all of us being together is part of what makes America great. And I think broadband is where we're going to push that envelope next.
All right, Congressman Johnson, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Remember, you can always connect with us by going to our website, maguirewater.com. You can also ask questions by sending us an email at info@maguirewater.com, or you can follow or reach out to us on any of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us on the Maguire Podcast.